Hello and a very warm welcome to this half of Talking Europe. Criminals and weapons are crossing both external and internal borders of the EU with apparent ease, but police intelligence and information struggling to do the same. However, the latest terror attacks carried out in London were done by a British man in his 50s with a car and a knife. Everyone agrees that 100% security isn't really possible, but are things getting better or worse here in the EU? Well, I've come to the European Council, where I'm joined by the EU's counter-terrorism coordinator, Mr. Gilles de Kerchove. Mr. Kerchove, thanks for your time.
My pleasure.
Before we get into all the improvements or difficulties that persist since we've seen these attacks across Europe in the last recent years, there's another question that many people are starting to look at. We saw Article 50 triggered by the UK this week, a 6-page letter given by Prime Minister Theresa May, in which she mentioned security quite a number of times. And a lot of people are concerned, if and when the UK leaves, will that make EU security into more jeopardy? Will it make us less secure?
I don't want to comment on the process, because that's in the hands of the negotiators, and we've decided not to enter into the discussion of the relationship after Brexit until we've reached phase 2 of the negotiation. First diverse and then new relationship. But we, legally speaking, in a way, Brexit won't have an impact on intelligence sharing. Why? Because intelligence sharing does develop outside the EU framework. So the relationship between the security services and the intel services is organized in a different setting outside the EU framework. So to that respect, in fact, Brexit won't have a major impact. Where there is a possible impact, it's when the UK is part of different agencies, Europol, Eurojust, which are the two main ones in the field of security, internal security. And on this, the only thing I can say that the United Kingdom will be in the same position as the United States or Turkey or Tunisia or whatever, a third state. And we have operational agreement with third state, provided that they match our requirements in terms of data protection, which the UK does because of the EU legislation. So I believe, we'll have very, very quickly an operational agreement between Metropolitan Police and Europol.
And that information sharing, as you say, will continue. It seems to be really one of the main problems we have here in the EU, is that information sharing across borders. Has that improved since the attacks in Paris and Brussels?
Significantly. First, we have improved a lot the way member states do populate and do use the different databases that we have. Second, we are creating new one, like ETIAS for visa-free travelers, the entry-exit system to check where they are overstays.
Will that become compulsory? Is that systematic then at the external borders?
We are now feeding the database more and more with biometrical data, which we were not so far, and it's very important to detect false document, false identity, as we've seen in Berlin. The perpetrator had 10 different identities and different fake IDs. Europol has developed a lot its database and has created a center of excellence, the ECTC. The security services on their side, outside the EU framework, have set up a permanent platform, a human platform and an IT platform, and now they are exploring what the intel community and the law enforcement community could do together.
For a European, what will that all mean? Will it mean that I'll spend more time getting back into the EU, those external borders, and we'll have a new external border even in Northern Ireland? It's
not a problem as such, because we are now traveling with a biometrical passport, and you swipe the passport, it takes less than a second. And lastly, there is an important work ongoing on making the database more interoperable. And the idea is to make the life of the border guard much easier with single search interface, so they would query only the system once, and it would just check in all the relevant database inside Europe or with Interpol, as well as a biometric matching system by which the database would talk to each other. So that's an important progress.
And we're getting to have that in place in the near future, or?
We'll have a report by May, and then it has to be implemented in legislation, so it will take a bit some time. not that long, I think.
Of course, after all of that, the latest attack we saw in London was carried out by a British man, born and raised there. It was claimed by the Islamic State group.
That's the game.
But, I mean, for you, was it a lone wolf attack?
I think so. So far, I've not been informed that there was any sort of structured cell behind or any planning from Raqqa. And that just illustrates that the threat is much more diverse and complex than it was before. We, at the same time, have structured cells, and we don't know how many, and if they've been prepositioned by Daesh, sent by Raqqa or Deir ez-Zor from Syria and Iraq. We have people who are directed from there through internet and through encrypted network. And at the same time, we have just people inspired. Would-be jihadists which have been prevented from traveling, people who just get radicalized either on internet or by interaction with a preacher or whatever, or mentally ill people. And so the threat is neither coming only from outside or from inside, it comes from both. But I believe more and more we'll see lone actor type of attack.
Well, you mentioned there how people become radicalized. Are we getting a better understanding? And I know there's been a lot of measures put in place as how to de-radicalize people. Is that possible?
De-radicalize, nobody believes it's possible, or not very easily. It's more disengagement. It's a sort of coaching process by which you try to convince someone not to use violence to promote his or her ideas. And some of the member states are now developing programs. Not quickly enough, I believe, because we need that more and more in prison, before the detainees is released, and outside prison as an alternative to criminal law. And we'll have to address that more and more with the returnees, the so-called returnees from Iraq and Syria, a lot of women, a lot of children who have been faced to violence, who have been involved in violence. I heard the other day the experience in Belgium from a child soldier who were involved in very violent war in Congo. And they went to Belgium, and they have not been treated effectively. And the problem is that it's only 10 years later that they became extremely violent because they've not received the proper psychological assistance that they deserved at the time when they came to Brussels. Yeah,
that sounds understandable. Well, of course, after every attack, the EU is looking at new measures it can possibly put in place to prevent the same types of events in the future. Recently, the Commission here was looking at putting more controls on cash transfers to try and target the financing of terrorist groups.
With every new attack, the same question arises: what can the European Union do to tackle terrorism? The EU's counter-terrorism strategy includes cooperation in several key areas. The Schengen Information System allows member states to share information on individuals suspected of terrorism. This is completed by the European Criminal Records Information System, which centralises information on criminal convictions. Other measures have been implemented in the wake of the Paris attacks last year, including the launch of the European Counter-Terrorism Centre, which is part of Europol, and the creation of an EU-wide PNR system, which allows police and justice officials to access airline passenger data, covering all flights to and from the EU. Some EU leaders say more needs to be done.
Make it harder for criminals and terrorists to finance themselves is an effective way of disrupting planning for attacks. So we're taking the opportunity of implementing our international obligations to harmonise our approach to the criminalisation of money laundering across the EU.
The threat from terrorism remains high, as experts warn of changing tactics, including attacks on soft targets by lone wolf militants.
So there we saw control on cash transfers, but really all types of control are being brought into play. After that London attack, we saw the UK Home Secretary saying that she had a problem with the WhatsApp, this encrypted messages. She said it was uncalled for that terrorists could communicate with each other. At the same time, the man in that attack wasn't a known terrorist. So, you know, we can't possibly follow WhatsApp messages of everybody around the world. How do we control these kind of things, or is it useful?
One of the challenges that you mentioned is encryption. After the Snowden leaks, most of the internet companies start developing sophisticated encryption devices up to what they call end-to-end encryption, that WhatsApp itself has not access to the content. And so this is a real issue. And it's even more an issue that the Court of Justice in December decided that member states cannot no longer impose on telecom operators and service providers to keep the traffic data for a long period of time, that they have to determine a more targeted way to keep the traffic data, and they cannot have a blanket retention. It's a problem because if you don't get access to encrypted content, at least so far we had access to what is called metadata. Who is talking to who is sending a mail to who is exchanging a WhatsApp conversation with whom. And that was very, very important and very interesting in investigation, in preventing and foiling plots and so on. So we have to work on encryption. That's the reason why the German and the French Minister of Interior have asked the Commission to work in it. The Commissioner, Julian King, has now set up 2 working groups, one on the technical aspect, because it's quite sophisticated encryption, and on the legal side, and will report in June, I think, on this very important subject.
But as a regular Joe Soap at home, you know, I quite like the idea of having my messages encrypted. I don't know, I think
nobody wants to create vulnerabilities in the system. And we all believe we have to promote encryption. So we should not be misunderstood. The point is not to reduce encryption. We need encryption to protect activists in dictatorship. We need encryption to protect our private life. We need encryption to protect our banking transaction, business secrets. And so there is no way we want to make the system more vulnerable. And that's precisely the challenge. How to balance the need for a robust internet, protecting privacy and secrets, and at the same time not seeing the services, the law enforcement and the security service, going dark because they don't get access to content anymore.
Because I know a lot of the social media groups, Facebook and so on, they have signed agreements that if they see hate speech, they will take it down within 24 hours. But again, one wonders that line between freedom of speech and how dangerous is it using social media? How much power do those social media actually have?
That's the other aspect, is we want to remove from internet what I would call, to make it simple, unlawful content. Either content calling for jihad, for violence, for murder, as well as hate speech, xenophobia, and so on. On this, we have a dialogue with internet companies in what is called the IT Forum, led by the Commission. It's a public-private partnership where we have very interesting conversation, and we're making progress. The internet companies have accepted to be more forthcoming when unlawful content are flagged to them. And we have set up at Europol an internet referral unit, specialists monitoring the web and reporting, flagging what they believe to be unlawful. That's the first
step. And what kind of thing is deemed unlawful? You know, there's a lot of opinions that can get close to hate.
That's why it's important to have people trained to do that, because you have to, indeed, to distinguish between what is unlawful and what is just free speech. And when you and we flag something on internet, Google told us that it's removed in only 33% of the time. When it's the people specialized, they know exactly what is the threshold when you become unlawful. And therefore, they remove it in 93% of the time. Quite impressive. And that's why we need to specialize. That's the first step. The second step, it's a hash database created by the 4 main internet companies. They gave a signature to each picture and video which have already been removed, so that electronically or automatically on internet, they cannot be re-uploaded. Or if someone re-upload an already removed content, it is automatically removed.
And that would be from the EU or databases?
That would be
videos
a common
from
database
ISIS?
Between all the internet platforms.
Across
for the
world.
time being, the 4 main ones, but we want to extend that to smaller platforms. But a third step, and that's something we are discussing with the internet company, and that was much debated last week in the UK, it's automatic detection. Because if the companies can develop artificial intelligence algorithm to have a first screening and a first selection of what looks to be unlawful, then it's reviewed by human beings. So it's only the machine detecting, and then people specialized inside the companies removing what they, after a careful review, believe to be unlawful.
So they definitely have a lot of power then, that online world in recruiting and all of that. But again, another element we put in place here, or at least we agreed to put in place here in the EU after those attacks, was the passenger name record. Everybody agreed to it, but has it actually come into effect?
The member states have 18 months, I think they have until next year to implement, which means adopt the national legislation, implementing the directive, but also setting up what is called the PIU, the Passenger Information Unit, having the adequate softwares and so on. So they are working on it, not enough, not quickly enough for some of them, and the Commission is teasing and helping financially with expertise. Member states, they do share their expertise. For instance, the United Kingdom helps some member states because they're more advanced, because we would like to first to see the deadline respected by member states, but the sooner the better.
And very finally, Mr. de Kerchove, because we're running out of time, but the other airport rules that kind of are the bane of travellers' lives are these freezer bags that make liquids apparently bomb-proof as far as we see it, and also a new ban on laptops coming from certain countries on planes. Is that really necessary?
It is. It is necessary to be very vigilant. The Commission is working on it now, looking at the element which led the US first and then the UK to decide to ban laptop on board from certain airports and on certain airlines, not worldwide. But it's clear that you can hide in a laptop, in place of the battery, 250 grams of explosive, and it's enough to down a jumbo.
OK, well, Mr. de Kerchove, thanks so much for your time and your insight there brought to us on France 24. Thanks also, of course, to you at home for having watched. That brings us to the end of this edition. Have a good week. See you again next time.